Okay, we'll call the Groundwater Sustainability Agency meeting to order. We'll start with roll call.
Member Wood? Here. Vice Chair Grieva?
Here.
Member White?
Here.
Chair Thorpe?
Here.
Note that, what's that?
Board Member Rodriguez?
I was just going to say, Board Member Rodriguez is absent, for the record.
Okay, you all stand for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, public comments from the audience regarding items not on the agenda. This portion of the agenda allows an individual the opportunity to address the GSA on any items not on the closed session, consent calendar, public hearing, and agency business. Under state regulations, no action can be taken on non-agenda items, including issues raised under this agenda item. Members of the public should be aware of this when addressing the GSA regarding items not specifically referenced on this agenda. Do we have any public comments?
So let's check, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to know if our online audience can hear me. So if you wouldn't mind, Ms. Isaacson, can you please weigh in and let me know if I'm coming across okay?
You're coming across very well. It's so much better than it usually is. Thank you.
Good.
Okay, that was my happy dance. That was it. That's all you get.
Okay, so do we
Thank
have
you.
any public comments on items not on the agenda?
We have no hands raised, Mr. Chairman.
Okay,
And I should note for both board members and online audience that our clerk, Ann Rathburn, is not with us today, so we'll be doing the best we can.
okay, so consent calendar. All matters listed under consent calendar are considered routine and may be approved by one action of the agency unless a request for removal or discussion or explanation is received prior to the time agency votes on the motion to adopt. We have one item, which is the minutes of the September meeting. Do we have any public comments on consent calendar?
I see no hands raised.
No comments? Then we'll need a motion to adopt the minutes.
Move to approve.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay. Motion carried. Agency business. Receive Arroyo Seco Groundwater Sustainability Agency General Manager Status Report. Oral report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. We didn't have a meeting last month, and so I do apologize for that. We did also have, during the month of October, a 4-bay implementation subcommittee meeting, which I'm going to cover. I've got 4 items to cover today, and we'll have a number of things to consider in December and January and February. Just to give you a heads up, we'll be a little bit more rigorous coming up here as we end this year and begin the next. The first thing I want to do is just kind of recap the 4-bay sub-basin implementation committee meeting. We received an interesting water quality presentation from Preservation Inc. They're working under a grant to look at water quality and to develop some trends. So they're looking at the shallowmost wells they can get. They looked at 34 different wells as kind of their candidates, and they narrowed it down to about 19 wells that are in the 4-bay in the upper part of the Upper Valley. Member Wood will probably remember the presentation. The idea is to really look to see if there's any long-term trends relative to water quality. You know, of course, Preservation Inc. has been involved in developing nitrate work and others for the Salinas Valley relative to our, reporting requirements. So I think that the real message that I want to leave you with is that as we have moved past developing the first set of GSPs and have started to work on developing management actions and managing groundwater basins, water quality has now become an issue that DWR wants us to all look at. And this particular chunk of work is grant funded, so the Salinas Valley Basin GSA is working with Preservation Inc. to do the, kind of initial cut examination of water quality and see if there's any trends. So it was just really a presentation, and I wanted you guys to be aware of it. The other thing that we got, well, we did talk a little bit about the rural domestic water evaluation that we're doing, but I'll get to that as our second item. We had a brief discussion about our technical advisory committee looking at sustainable management criteria. Recall, we've talked a little bit about how we need a little bit more granularity in how we're going to implement, items that are of concern, like groundwater elevations, the way our current GSP looks at that issue. It's a relatively small number of wells, could be, like reported as a threshold violation, in our annual reports. So, the technical advisory group are looking at short-term and long-term issues and trying to develop, a set of criteria that are more appropriate to look at groundwater relative to, whether it be a short-term or a long-term issue like droughts, long-term droughts. It's an important element that will weave into our next round of GSPs. The TAC also met, the larger TAC met for the whole basin. And there was some discussion about new statistical analysis for the Upper Valley and the Forebay. And some of the analysis indicate that there's a long-term trend of slight groundwater decline, which would be contrary to what we had indicated in both the Forebay GSP and the Upper Valley. And I'm getting this, from Gus. He usually calls me and reports out. This was kind of a significant piece, and I told him, okay, let's get prepared so that we can bring a report about that analysis to the advisory committee and the board. We'll be doing that in December, most likely. And I want you guys to be aware of it. It's not totally alarming news, but it's different than what you've heard before. And the fact that it is declining indicates that we may have to have some sort of management actions associated with a long-term decline. And it's small in terms of its magnitude, but it's measurable in terms of the statistic work that was done. And I want to be sure or clear about the Forebay versus the Arroyo Seco management area, and Gus and I didn't get into that detail of a nuance kind of discussion. So we'll do that and we'll get prepared, but I wanted to give you a heads up. That was kind of an important takeaway for all of us. And I thought, I'd rather you guys hear it from me first than you hear it from anybody else. So I'll pause, and that's my first item. Chairman or board members, you have any questions about my report relative to the Sub-Basin Implementation Committee meeting?
I've got a couple questions. So where did this come from?
This came from analysis that the Technical Advisory Committee for the Salinas Valley Basin was conducting.
And was there a specific hydrological firm that worked on this, or?
That I don't know. I can tell you that Gus looked at the data and he looked at the analysis, and he generally concurred with the findings. So he and I need to unpack that a bit more. This was just a discussion that we had following a discussion about the second item, the rural water quality test, but he wanted to give me a heads up, and he was still digesting it. So as soon as I get more information that I can bring to you, we'll put it in front of the advisory committee and then onto your board.
Yeah, okay. Well, I don't know what it is about me that always is
No,
suspicious.
I think it's an important element in, and we've been, operating under a perceived idea that we're sustainable, and I want to make sure that we get you the right information and give you the right kind of understanding about it. I mean, we've all looked at I've shown you hydrographs that are covered decades, and they're darn near flat. So I want to know what this analysis is about as well.
That was my question. What period of time was the study done?
That's the other thing. I mean, certainly if we look at what's happened in the last 20 years with that prolonged drought that we had during the teens, yeah, it could have an impact. But that I don't know. Those are all valid questions. Stay tuned. But if it is indeed true, as it likely might be, then we need to be prepared for how we're going to address it in the coming revised GSP. Because we'll have a new GSP, in 2027? I know that seems like a long ways away, but it's right around the corner. So, and we'll need to make modifications. But I wanted you, like I said, to hear it from me first, and I'll try to get out a better package for you as quick as I can.
Is there any public comments on the first portion of the general manager's report?
Nancy Isaacson. Go ahead, Nancy, and Mr. Versick.
And Mr. Versick.
Let's go Nancy first.
Okay. Thank you. My understanding, so the TAC consists of Gus Yates, Bob Abrams, representing the Alliance, Dwight Smith, representing the Water Coalition, and I think there's one other, and I can't remember his name. So my understanding is this was all put together by all four of them and to some extent, and reviewed and discussed, etc. And I'm not sure, with all due respect, Curtis, I think I heard things reported back to me a little bit differently. My understanding is, yes, there are long-term declines, but kind of, I hate to say, negligible. Certainly under the minimum thresholds, etc. And so I would suggest that, it would be important to have, might be important, and I think maybe that's what you're suggesting, to have Gus. It'd be helpful, I think, to have Gus come and make a presentation. He's chair of that TAC, as I understand. So
Ms. Isaacson, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. Yes, I will have Gus come down and make the presentations. Yes, without doubt.
So those are my only comments. I'm not sure it's dire, but it's
I'm
worth
kind of with
looking
you.
at.
I'd like to see a little bit more information about it before we get too far down the road. So it's good to know that there's something coming. Give you a heads up. Yes, Mr. Versick.
Mr. Versick.
Thank you, Chair. Strandberg, I think that's his name, is the fourth person there. I may have that slightly off, of the four-person TAC, SMC TAC. And just to add to what Ms. Isaacson and Mr. Weeks said, I did listen to that presentation, and it is recorded, so one could do that. And I'm not at all speaking on behalf of the TAC, of course, just some observations as I recollect it. The long-term trends, because that's how that's the words they chose. There's quite a few caveats. One of which is they were talking about reviews in terms of 5-year and 10-year chunks. So this is not long-term in the sense of 3 years. This seems to be long-term in the sense of 10, 15, 20, 30 years out, if in fact it is heading whatever direction. And of course, many kinds of robust discussion about the time period of review and what it all means, and whether there's a difference in the Upper Valley versus the Forebay. It wasn't, and there was some small amount of discussion about the Arroyo Seco in particular. So just when you get Mr. Yates to give you an explanation, there will be a lot more detail, a lot more background. So as Mr. Weeks said, this is something you want to know is coming, but there is nothing remotely like a conclusion about anything at this point. I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you, Mr. Versick. Any other public comments?
No other hands are raised, Mr. Chairman.
And so we can move forward with your,
So as I suspected this would be a hot item, that's why I wanted to raise it. It's important that all of you hear these things soonest rather than later. So that's why I brought it to you. Gus, as I mentioned, my next item, Gus and I were discussing the domestic rural water quality evaluation. And he's got a draft that he's shared with me, and it's under staff review. I've seen it. It's quite simply unremarkable, and there's nothing that really hadn't anticipated. Yeah, there's some nitrates in some area. Yes, the water quality in and around the Arroyo Seco River is better than the rest of the basin. Yes, we'd like to see some potential consolidation of rural domestic water systems, but there's a lot of caveats. That's just purely on a water quality basis. That needs to be kind of fleshed out. The only thing that Gus mentioned that he found a little bit, I'll call it peculiar, was kind of a ring around the city of Greenfield, a little higher than normal or higher than the rest of the area in the Arroyo Seco Cone management area of nitrates. It might be because some of there might be some legacy use of fertilizer and such in and around the city closer to it. Nothing like it was alarming, but it's a noticeable trend visually that you'll see. So my plan is to bring the report to, again, the advisory committee and then on to your board next month. That's the plan. So I'll pause, and like I said, there's no real surprises. I think it's a pretty good, straightforward report. I will note, though, that he went further than just the Arroyo Seco Cone management area. He covers all of the forebay and even into Upper Valley. But so he's got a good chunk of the heart of the Salinas Valley. And so I think it's a better representation of the entire area, rather than just the forebay. And that's probably a good thing.
any board questions or comments? Any public comments?
See no hands, Mr. Chairman.
We'll let you continue.
What's that?
Is that the end of your report?
Oh, no, I got
We'll
more.
let you continue.
Just like the Ginsu knife, man, I got more.
Okay, I don't see any public comments.
No, here we go. The third thing I have for you is, if you recall, a number of months ago, we talked about the development of a water rights white paper, and about us participating as an organization, in addition to Marina Coast Water District's GSA. The paper is, essentially being developed by the Salinas Valley Basin GSA as kind of an informational item to help their board, to help all of us, frankly, get our brains kind of around water rights relative to potential demand management actions. And I made it clear, as per your direction, that we want to take it through our advisory committee and our board before it gets launched. We want to have a process where it gets vetted before we, as an organization, say, yeah, we participated. Right now there's a whole bunch of logos on the front page, demonstrate our participation. The Salinas Valley Basin GSA, Monterey County Water Resource Agency, Marina Coast Water District, and us. And both Marina Coast and I raised our hands and said, hey, wait, before we put our logos and our, kind of stamp on that, we indicated we needed to take it to our board. So I made that super clear. Brett Harmon was concerned about, how that gets done. I was as well. And, I said, we probably ought to take the document to the boards at the same day and at least present it in public so that it makes its public introduction the same day. and as an information item where we're not going to take any action. So the plan right now is to bring that document to you and to the Salinas Valley Basin GSA. I'll call a special meeting. It'll be on the 13th of February, and we'll launch it at that time. You'll get a chance to, see it, touch it, feel it, read it. And then it will go to our advisory committee for review and approval in March and onto the board. And if we approve it, then, they can add our logo to the logo and continue to demonstrate or include our participation in that. I know it's a sensitive topic. I can tell you my perception, I'm not a lawyer, but I read through it and I think it's a very good document. I think it's got some very useful elements. I think there's a great value in a lot of the organizations that are going to be vested with the task of managing groundwater to have something like this as a resource, and that we all kind of have the same resource. I think it's a pretty good document. I think my discussions with Mary Lerner, she thinks it's also a pretty good document. But I also am very sensitive to the fact that water rights are a sensitive topic. Totally acknowledge that. And I wanted to make sure I brought the document through this process consistent with your direction. So I wanted you guys to know about that. Questions?
Any questions from board members? No? Any public comments?
Not seeing any hands, sir.
No? Tom Versick.
Oh,
Go ahead,
Mr. Versick.
Thank you, Chair and Mr. Weeks. Tom Versick speaking. Just a pitch for when staff looks at things is I'm hoping to see the word underflow in that document. I'm not suggesting how it should be treated, but my impression in their studies and some State Water Resources Control Board decisions that highly suggest it is relevant in some parts of the Greater Valley where there are shallow wells near water courses, be it the Salinas or the Arroyo Seco. So that's just a pitch. I'm not expecting a response. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Versick.
I don't see any more public comments.
Nope.
Continue.
Continue. Here we go. Like I said, we've got plenty of things to unpack today. My next item has to do with the Salinas Valley River, with the Salinas River HCP. That process is going on. It is of import to us relative to, how the Arroyo Seco is going to, recharge, what the Salinas River is going to do. So I have continued to participate both on their technical advisory group as well as their kind of working group. They have developed a new set of reservoir release triggers aimed at increasing the number of passage days. They've also tried to make it simpler. They're going to continue to use the 173 CFS at Release Creek as a indicator that the Arroyo Seco and the Salinas River are going to join. They have used at least 80 CFS at Chular as an amount of water they want to have available so that it can push all the way through to the ocean. They made most of the modeling runs that they've modified on these new criteria with the assumption that the lagoon is going to be open and then they can route all the water out the lagoon. And then they did some additional modeling runs relative to this new set of criteria. It better defines the time periods for adult and smolt migrations, little ones moving out, big ones moving in, that kind of thing. And I think they've done a pretty good job laying out a revised flow chart for how they're going to operate the reservoirs to try to increase fish passage. But in the modeling data that we saw in terms of results, there wasn't a lot of change in the number of passage days compared to the existing flow charts and the existing triggers. The modelers indicated they haven't put any emphasis or bias in the way in which they run that Salinas Valley hydrogeologic model. That's got me a little bit concerned because I keep hearing this trend of tweaking it for specific purposes rather than having a tool that you could use multiple times in multiple applications and have some confidence in the results. We've said this before, and we've kind of talked about it, but that model is really complicated, and it has lots of moving parts. And I think it's exactly the right kind of tool to look at whether or not you can get water from the reservoirs all the way to the ocean, given a certain number of criteria. It doesn't appear to give us results, at least without having to get in and tinker with it, that you would expect. Yeah? I mean, I would expect that there would be these new criteria. In flowcharts, there would be a few more passage days especially during normal and dry normal years. And they acknowledge, they being the modelers and the Monterey County Water Resource Agency, acknowledge that they still have some tweaking to do. So this has been kind of a long process, again, somewhat hindered by this surface groundwater model. So we continue to kind of limp along with it. My takeaway was that it's a usable tool, but it needs to be tinkered with all the time. So it takes a lot of labor, expensive labor, to get it to work. I talked about 180 CFS at Chular, 173 at Release Creek. The input section that they wanted to have some response from all of us other technical folks had to relate to, okay, well, here's these new set of criteria. In addition to that, we want to look at winter releases from the reservoirs, either from storage or as bypass flows. Storage means, you're going to take some water that you have stored, you have a storm, you can hook up, the Salinas River and keep some additional flow in it to get fish up and down the Salinas River from a winter release. That may be a really good thing to add additional passage days, especially earlier in the year. Also provides recharge into the groundwater basin, which isn't a bad thing. The bypass option is similar, only what it does is it looks at the incoming water into the reservoirs, especially in Nacimiento, where we have better data, and makes a release of less than or equal to what's coming in. The agency has 30 days in which to be able to route water through the reservoirs without it being counted as storage. So there's some flexibility in how they can operate those reservoirs during the winter, during those months where they would normally be just storing, to maybe take some additional water, put it into the system and prolong the river channel for passage for fish. I think many of us think that the bypass option is a really good option. The storage option is okay as well. Both of them provide, like I say, additional groundwater benefits. That's good for all of us. And if it provides additional passage days, I see it as a win-win. The challenge was that, I opined that it's really difficult for us to provide you input when we don't have any kind of evaluation or model runs to be able to speak to. I don't know what that's going to do. So we had kind of a high-level discussion about the fact that they need to do their homework before they bring it to us on that regard. So stay tuned. It's going to be a long process.
Questions or comments? Public comments? I see that.
Last item. Salinas Valley Basin GSA has brought to our our coordination committee meeting, the idea that they wanted to modify our existing implementation agreement. I've heard through working with our attorneys that they're uncomfortable with a wholesale change of that agreement and would prefer to just do an amendment if we do anything at all, rather than open up the whole agreement. I'm bringing that to you to kind of get your direction to confirm that's where you want to go. If you recall, Member Wood and Chair Thorpe, we had that discussion several months ago at our last coordination committee meeting, at least about modifying the agreement. The idea being, if we put together an amendment, it won't open up the whole agreement. It'll be limited to what's in the amendment. That's probably it certainly is a safer way in terms of safeguarding all of the work that we did in making the implementation agreement, while still giving us some flexibility, try to clean up some of the things we want to clean up. So it's a question, that's my request of you today.
What are they uncomfortable with, or what do they want to?
Well, our attorneys are just uncomfortable opening up the whole agreement.
No, I understand that part of it, but why does the basin want to change it? Why does
Well,
this?
if you recall, what she wanted to do, well, one, she wanted to make the agreement more or less consistent with the other implementation agreement she has with Marina Coast. Okay, I can understand that request, but that's not really that important, but it is important to her. The other thing, like, we're not meeting like we should. There's some administrative cleanup that really probably ought to be done that better reflects what we're actually doing. And so those are the real drivers.
Well, I still have some bruises and scars from everything that it took to make that agreement to start with. I still have an occasional ache on a cold day.
Yeah.
So I'm really all about just having an addendum, or whatever you want to call it, on here and not open the whole thing. I get it with not having the meetings, it's not written out quite the right way. I'm not so sure I really care whether our agreement is the same as Marina Coast or not. Maybe Marina Coast should change their agreement to be more like ours, so it's more consistent. So I'm not really concerned about that. But I think if we can address those issues and make them happy with those changes, we should do it. But I would drag my feet on just opening it up. So that's my 2 cents.
Comments?
I mean, I think it makes sense to limit it as much as possible to just things that where the problems really are, so, rather than trying to.
I would agree with that, especially if that's the advice we're getting from council.
Yeah, I agree. Administrative issues, we certainly should modify those.
That's all I ask for you guys to provide, so I appreciate that. I think it's important that I have been kind of dragging my feet, to be honest. I haven't really dove in and made wholesale changes, so I think it's appropriate, that way I can get back to her and say, hey, this is what we want to do, and see if, she wants to even go through the addendum or amendment process. Thank you.
Any public comments? See none.
I see none either.
Receive and file.
I'm surprised we got through
I have
that.
one more item I'd like to bring up. I believe our meeting would be scheduled for Christmas Eve
Oh, wow.
next month. So if we want to have one, we probably ought to move it. If it's important to have a meeting next month,
Well,
Christmas Eve might not be the right.
it's not super important. There's a couple of those items that I want to keep, going. I'm mostly concerned about, getting Gus in here and having him talk to you guys. So and also the rural water quality piece. If you want to have a meeting in December, those would be the action items.
Well,
That would be up to
the only other thing I thought of isn't there also something coming in front of the Monterey County Board of Supervisors?
Well, there's that basin report, but that has nothing really to do with us.
Okay.
I mean, it's indirectly. I mean, it's something that's going to be considered, next week? And we've already filed our letter indicating our displeasure and problems with the technical elements.
December, I believe.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
December 4th.
Well, more than likely, generally things kind of slow up between Thanksgiving and New Year's Day, right?
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I can push all this into January. That's not a problem. I just,
I'm all right with that. I'm okay with pushing it to January.
okay.
It's okay, yeah,
Yeah.
it's fine.
it works for you guys.
All right,
If something
so
urgent happens, you can always.
I can always
let us know.
schedule a special meeting. So with that, then we can take Christmas Eve off the calendar. We won't have a meeting next month unless I need to have a special meeting. And I'll work with council on getting that done, if that needs to happen. So thank you for that.
That's all I've got. We'll adjourn the meeting.
You came up with the most important thing that we discussed here.
You want to see us on Christmas Eve, huh?
I'm